Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1972-75 draft. And we have 5th through 8th round draft results. I decided I would just simply go to a team and what I thought was one of the best picks they had in the 5th or 8th round. The 5th round, you're taking the player from the biggest talent pool, which is the 4th year out, which in this case is 75. 6th round would be 1974, 7th, 73, and the 8th round would be 72. The 8th round pick in 72 is going to be from the smallest talent pool, but it's only a 1-year contract. So if it's a player you're not crazy about, it's only like a 1-year deal. So it's more important to nail those 5th round picks. Think of them as each round of the draft is less length on the contract. So 5th round's a 4-year deal, and a 3-year deal, a 2-year deal, and a 1-year deal. So with that, we're going to begin and look at the best pick that I thought here for each team. And beginning with Ohio, I like the versatility of Ike Brown because he could play all over the diamond. As a matter of fact, this column of position E rating isn't big enough. You see it's kind of truncated there. And the interesting thing about Ike Brown is that he's a 289, 407, 788 guy. So even against righties, which he's not as good against, he has a ton of walks there. And if you need him to catch, you need him to play shortstop. He can do both of those or either. And he had a choice between 72 and 73, so he waited till the final couple rounds to make that final choice. Because in 73 he can catch, and 72 he can play shortstop. So that's how they fit him in there nicely. Florida Marlins. They actually, I think one of the better picks they made in the final four here was Rich Trosden was actually a Padre. They seem to like these Padre pitchers. They also had drafted Steve Arlen. But Trosden in 73, on the undrafted free agent list, sometimes there's a marking for that. And here it is he was the number 2 lefty on the market, undrafted. So that's high value. I forget who L1. We'll find L1. It'll be in here somewhere. But yeah, L2, Rich Trosden, the second best lefty in the undrafted free agents. Next up, Kansas City. I think Larry Gurra got improved, and he needed to be improved. He went from a 4.62 ERA. Frankly, the thing with Kansas City acquiring Larry Gurra is that it was just a little too soon. I mean, he doesn't really get good until 1976 and beyond. Then he's very reliable. But early on, he got an early start, I think, in 1970, and then he went back to the minors. We brought him up with a 73 or 74 card. It was pretty bad. But we got this 75 card now, and he's got a 3.51 ERA. The whip is still a little bit high, though. It's a 1.41 whip, but getting him better. He was one of the weakest left-handers we had in the league last year. All right, next up, Texas Rangers. I like a couple of these guys, but I think I got to go with Jim Bibby in the 7th round as a Texas Ranger. He's R4. He was the 4th best righty in the undrafted free agent pool. He's a starter 8, and Jim Bibby's a late bloomer. He's 28 years old here. He would be with Texas. He'd be with Cleveland. He'd win a World Series with the Pirates. He's got 180 innings and a 3.24 ERA, so that's good value for the Texas Rangers. Las Vegas. Trading for Danny Frisella, who was a really cool reliever from the Mets. And the Mets just couldn't keep everybody, so they had to start trading guys away. And Vegas swooped in and said, we want Frisella because he has multiple good years. And as a righty reliever who gets lefties out and usually dominates lefties as well, is very valuable in this league. So getting Danny Frisella for the 8th round pick, cashing in the keeper. All right, Boston. Oh boy, this is like no-brainer territory. So the first overall pick was Fred Lynn, and then they didn't commit to exactly who would be their other player in the year of 1975 in the 5th round. There were many candidates, including Jim Rice, but they went with Cecil Cooper because Cecil actually performed better than Jim Rice, and Jim Rice will come along next year. Don't worry about that. You can't bring them all in at the same time. But 25-year-old Cecil Cooper will get some playing time with Boston before he finishes the decade with the Brewers. He's 311, 355, 899, and was a big player in the World Series against the Reds. So Cecil Cooper and Fred Lynn added to a Boston team that fell in the last place in the American League East. So hopefully that will turn them around. The Dodgers. Well, there's a lot of interesting moves here. This is the team that you draft in and draft out. They keep improving their guys internally. Then they sign dudes off the street in undrafted free agency. So they have this, kind of like an all-star and scrub. They don't really have a middle-class roster component on the Dodgers. And so they're improving Ron Cey and Steve Yeager. By improving Ron Cey, 75, he had 25 homers and at 283. Pretty much all the Dodger regulars are having their best year, from catcher all the way through the infield and outfield. So that should mean they compete for the American League West, National League West. And it seems like they and the Giants are far ahead of the Padres and the Astros. The Big Red Machine, with them, I just have to say George Foster, because, they could have had Foster's 72 card 3 or 4 drafts ago. It wasn't that great, so they just buried him and protected him for a long time, and finally popped the cork in 1975. He's a 300 hitter with 23 home runs, and they don't even have Ken Griffey on this roster yet. They have to wait next year to get him. So Griffey will wait till next year. He'll replace Bobby Tolan when he moves on. Seattle's best pick here, it's got to be Skip Lockwood, who was an all-star for Seattle. He had a very good one-loss record for them in their rotation, got to an all-star game. Now he's 20 years old, was a Met, and now he goes to the Met bullpen, and he's got a sparkling 1.49 ERA to close out games for Seattle now. So he could go to the all-star game again in different roles, once as a ace and once as a closer. Possibly. Colorado Rockies best pick here. This one's kind of tricky, but I'm going to go with Jim Strickland because they took advantage of plucking off a lefty reliever when there weren't many left. And Strickland has a 2.50 ERA in the year of 72, and when you start seeing the year 72 in this half and look at the lefty relievers, they're going to be pretty bad. From here on out. So getting a good lefty reliever, at least earned run average wise, was quite a feat for Colorado. Next up, Arizona. Bunch of interesting picks here. I got to go with Steve Braun. Here's a guy who spent a big chunk of his career as a pinch hitter in the National League. But here he has a couple years with the Twins, and this year he's 27 years old. Infield and outfield, 526 plate appearances, a 302 average, 818 OPS. So really, it's a full season for Steve Braun, and there's no reason why you can't play him every day. You can make him a DH, second base, third base, outfield, whatever they need to do. Braun should be in the lineup, and he hits lefties very well. So that was a cool pick for Arizona. Versatile player for an expansion team that needs versatile players. Next up, California Angels. Yeah, I like improving Don Baylor. And again, Don Baylor, they got him from Baltimore way back with a 72 card, and Baylor actually didn't move to California until the late 70s. But Baltimore had no real room for him in the outfield, and then the Oakland A's didn't either. And California always needed offense, so they scrambled to get Baylor much sooner than they actually did historically. So after getting him as a 250 hitter, they bumped him up to the 75 card where he's a 282 hitter, 849 OPS. He's actually a rangy 2 in the outfield. Can't throw. Something wrong with his arm. He's got a +3 arm. It was always bad. But basically, this card, you can run this card all the way out and then replace it with the 79 American League MVP card of Don Baylor. So that was a really critical move for the California Angels moving forward. All right, New York Mets. I mean, it's kind of no-brainer, but I just got to say, you take Tug McGraw instead of not doing it. And there was a slim chance that McGraw would fall into the hands of the Phillies sooner than later, but obviously they are not going to let that happen. I don't know the stigma of how it went down when he went from the Mets to the Phillies. But anyway, he's still got a 170 ERA. Um, his card is better in 71 than 72. They're about the same versus righties, but in 72, this card, he does get hit by left-handed batters. E0, that helps. But Tub McGraw, easily the best player in this group of four. Milwaukee Brewers. Actually, the pick I like here is, believe it or not, Kurt Bevacqua. Milwaukee would have had Don Money on their team, but Don Money was taken in the expansion draft by Colorado. So Milwaukee really didn't have a key third baseman during the timeline. They had Fregosi, Ken McMullen, some other guys. But actually, Kurt Bevacqua actually did play for the Brewers for a short bit of time. And here, at third base, he's a 3.25. He's also got 309 plate appearances, and he's much better against righties than lefties. So he's pretty much almost a full-time third baseman. So I kind of liked him replacing Don Money. The Padres. Oh, I got to go with Brent Strom. So it was one thing to improve Randy Jones and get him into a 2.24 ERA. It's a whole nother thing to get a second lefty in your rotation with a 2.54 ERA. They're both starter sevens. Randy Jones 25, Brent Strom 26. So Batman and Robin right there for the Padres, getting two much better than average left-handed starting pitchers. For Randy Jones, it'll last all through the decade. For Brent Strom, he'll run out of gas in a few years. But still, for now, the 75 Strom card is outstanding. The whips of each pitcher is right here. 104 for Randy Jones, 113 for Brent Strom. So before I said the Dodgers and Giants, I think these lefties of the Padres are going to at least make the National League West interesting. Followed by their division rival Astros. And, here's a cool pick that I liked. It was getting Clay Kirby, who was a Padre, and they made an interdivision trade. They said the Padres, once they got Brent Strom and they had Freisleben and Ed Sprague, they filled up their rotation, and they had the rights to Kirby. Houston called and said, we'll give you a draft token. So Houston gave a token to the Padres to get Clay Kirby. He's still good in 72. With a 3.13 ERA and 238 innings. So really, the Padres and Astros did well in that, both division rivals. The Twins also in here somewhere. Yeah, they made a deal for Dick Bosman. Same scenario. The Texas Rangers, he was a keeper for them, but they had no room in the rotation. The Twins desperately needed somebody, and so they made a deal getting Dick Bosman, who has had a really interesting Strat-O-Matic career for me, where he was a Washington Senator, a Texas Ranger. We traded him to the Cincinnati Reds one year for one season. They won the World Series, even though Dick Bosman was a number 4 starter and hardly pitched. Then they cut him. And so he returned to Texas with a World Series ring. And then they made him a keeper, and then they traded him. So, yeah, has a suitcase in the Strat-O-Matic League. Next up, Cleveland. These picks, I think the pick I like here is Charlie Spikes. What was really interesting about this is kind of like how you look at the roster and where they fit. And originally, I did not want to take Charlie Spikes because I was looking for a guy who could hit lefties better than righties, and Spikes is the opposite of that. But then I looked a little closer and realized that Oscar Gamble is a 4 defense and Charlie Spikes is a 3 defense. And believe it or not, Oscar Gamble, as a lefty, hits left-handed pitchers better than right-handed pitchers. So I moved Gamble from right field to designated hitter, clearing a spot for Charlie Spikes to be an everyday right fielder hitting righties better than lefties. And he should be an everyday player. He had 612 plate appearances in 74. That's Charlie Spikes' best year, with 22 homers, a 271 batting average. He played in the league for about 7-8 years. He only had 1 or 2 really good ones. So that's the point of the carryover league, is to find a guy who's good once every 4 years, get him in the league. So Glad we got Charlie Spikes to Cleveland. St. Louis Cardinals. With this, there's a whole lot of storytelling with this. I'm going to go with Bob Forsch because the Cardinals wanted to get Bob Forsch in either year, 74 or 75. In 75, he has a starting pitcher who can pitch on 3 days rest. However, they didn't need a starting pitcher because they still had Sonny Seabird, Scipio Spinks, John Curtis, and Bob. They still have Bob Gibson. So they're really not going to need Bob Forsch to go into the rotation until Bob Gibson retires. So that created the opportunity of saying, hey, don't put me in my best year, 75. I'll go with my 74 card, which is still a 2.97 ERA in 100 innings, and he can pitch in relief. That enabled the Cardinals to double up with Ted Simmons and Al Hrabowski in their best year of 1975. So that all was facilitated by Bob Forsch being flexible enough to have a couple seasons to choose. The Expos of these guys, well, I got to call Jerry White the best pick here just because it's somewhat surprising that of the young kids coming in the future, and we're just years away from Larry Parrish and Andre Dawson and Warren Cromartie and Ellis Valentine and, of course, all these pitchers, Sanderson, Gullickson, and so forth and so on. It's Jerry White, the first of the guy to join Gary Carter, because Jerry White is a 2 in center field, and he hit 299, 364 on base. So, yeah, and even when Dawson debuts in a year or two, he'll start out as a 3 in center field. So Jerry White's the best defensive player as a 22-year-old. Next up, Portland. Out of these 4 picks, I just got to go with Ron Blomberg. So Frank Robinson was the first choice out of the 1973 box because of his Star Hall of Fame. Even though he's 37 years old, Portland went out and got him for star power, basically, to sell tickets, to get people to come to the game to see a Hall of Famer, Frank Robinson. And then so the second choice in that same year is Ron Blomberg. And this is the famous first designated hitter card, basically, because it was the Yankees playing the Red Sox at Fenway Park, which meant Blomberg batted before Orlando Cepeda batted, so they call him the first DH. Anyway, he hit 329 with an 893 OPS, did Blomberg, and he had like 3 or 4 nice years hitting over 300. Couldn't play defense at all and didn't hit lefties very well. Perfect DH. The Cubs, who really had a heck of a draft. Both the Chicago teams, Cubs and White Sox, had really good drafts. In this group, I gotta mention Tim Hosley as a catcher. In a short sample, only 171 at-bats, but the guy hit home runs. 255 average, but a 382 on base, 433 slugging, 815 OPS. It's a really cool card for Tim Hosley. This would be the outlier here, the one every 4 years, the maximum of the league. So they're going to maximize the amount of years they use, and they still do have Randy Hundley on the team for the defensive late inning catcher. The Yankees in this group of players, I'm gonna put 75. What they did is they improved Chris Chambliss, and the reason is when it came to the 75 year, they didn't have a guy they liked in the free agency area, and they know how important a 5th round pick is. So if you can't find a guy out there to draft, the next step is to look at your own team and see if you can improve one of your guys. And Chris Chambliss was a 282 hitter. Now he's a 304 hitter with a little bit more power. 313 at first base, 603 plate appearances for the Yankees. So we got out of the Cleveland card altogether, went straight to a Yankee card in 75. And that meant that they didn't have to suffer with a bad guy on a 4-year deal. So having Chris Chambliss with that card for 4 years is going to be fine because he's a very steady statistical player. Year in and year out, he gives you the same kind of stats. Very close, all the way through like 82 with the Yankees and the Braves. So that's a great pick for the Yanks there. Toronto Blue Jays, yeah, I gotta do it again. I gotta say their best pick here is Cleon Jones. Now, who did he play for? Did you say the New York Mets? because this is where New York Mets players go on vacation. They go to Toronto. It started with AG, then it went Clendenon, then Ed Kranepool this year, and he brought Cleon Jones with him. The funny part is that the Mets traded in the offseason Cleon Jones to Las Vegas. Las Vegas had a choice between Cleon Jones and Tommy Davis. They went with Tommy Davis. They had no room in the outfield for Cleon, so then they traded him to Toronto for a token. And so Toronto has him and AG and Kranepool. This is where the Mets go. All right, the Giants. Oh, what a great draft. Another one of the best drafts here. There's so many interesting stories here to who is the best. I just got to mention this Dick Dietz card once again. He was a Giant in 70. He had moved to Atlanta by 73. As if the 73 Braves needed any more firepower than they already had. One of the historic offenses Strat-O-Matic sets you ever want to get. Go just roll out the 73 Braves offense. Just go get that offense and run it up against any Strat-O-Matic team you want to do and see how much damage they do. And obviously the pitching wasn't good in Atlanta, but boy, that offense of 73 is ridiculous. Plus, they had Chuck Coggin and Dick Dietz on the bench. Dietz, 191 plate appearances. Here are the numbers. 295 average, a 474 on base. This is Barry Bonzian kind of thing. 432 slugging, 905 OPS. And so the Giants, because they had his rights, he was a 70 Giant, a 71 Giant, and they decided to hold on to him and not let him go to Atlanta. And frankly, Atlanta, didn't really miss him because they're using all of the firepower. We'll see Atlanta shortly. All right, I would say if the White Sox are one of these A+, A- drafts right here, every pick was fit perfectly. They fit every need. They fit the most potential they could get at the draft selection. There's not a question mark here. Out of the final four, I guess the guy I got to talk about, it was right here, is Mike Garman. So Mike Garman was a Cardinal reliever. He's 24 years old and 74. And frankly, the Cardinals really wanted to hide this guy and take him this year or next year. But the problem the Cardinals have, let me go back up for a second. They're up close. Is that in 74, they wanted Lou Brock's AAA card with 118 steals. And I mentioned Bob Forsch earlier. They wanted that card so they can go with Simmons and Rabowski. So they locked up the 74s and 75s. So that meant that Mike Garman lost protection, and the White Sox were the first team. Here are the Cardinals up here. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. The 7th team after that said, we want the reliever. And they had a spot for him in the bullpen, an open spot for a right-handed reliever. Boom, they get him. Mike Garman, 2.64 ERA. He's got a 113 whip and 81 and 2/3 innings. Has a nice little career from like 74 to 78 or something like that. But that they do not have a weakness on their team at all. They needed a corner outfielder against lefties. They got Minnesota Twins Steve Bry hitting 739 OPS. Bradley, Downing, Gossage, Bart Johnson, Melton Wood. Boom. Perfect draft for the White Sox. They and the Cubs and the Giants are kind of the early winners of the draft. Actually, Oakland, hate to say it, they had a pretty damn good draft too. And their final four selections, I guess the sleeper pick I'm going to call is Bob Locker, because Bob Locker is the correct fit here. So basically, Locker did not play for Oakland in 1973. He got a World Series ring for them in 72. In 73, he played for the Cubs. But the 72 Bob Locker card is very weak against left-handed batters. And so I wanted Locker to be good against left-handed batters, to join Dave Hamilton, Jim Todd, and Raleigh Fingers. So now they have the perfect scenario of matchups in the Oakland bullpen. Righty who gets righties out, righty gets lefties out. And a lefty who gets righties out, and righty gets lefties out. They get the perfect four combos there for Oakland. Really, 7 out of their 8 picks. So it's probably a B plus draft because they also took Rusty Torres just to get a 2 in center field. That wasn't a great pick, but that's the only red mark on the Oakland draft. All right, Atlanta. Oh my goodness, they still have some work to do. Atlanta actually did something rather clever. They drafted 4 left-handed pitchers with the intention of trading one of them instead of just letting, because they had the rights to Mike McQueen and Mike Beard. They're both left-handed, and they took them both because they had their protection. They were Atlanta Brave pitchers. McQueen's 21, Beard's 25. So they realized that by hoarding left-handed pitching, it would make everybody else's left-handed pitching weaker. And then they're just going to flip Mike McQueen and improve one of their other positions to a team who's desperate. And by desperate, they'll probably get way much in trade compensation than they rightly should have. All right, the Phillies. In this group, I got to say it's Luzinski because you upgraded him to a 75 card. And by the way, he had 703 plate appearances, 89 walks, 34 homers, 120 RBIs, and a 300 average, 934 OPS for Luzinski. So even though we're only in 72 to 75, Philadelphia is treating it, or they're treating it like it's the late 70s when they went on that to all those league championship series. Well, in 72 they were horrible, and 73, 4, 5 not so great either. But they snuck into the league championship series a year ago. I don't think they're that good, but they seem to think they're that good because they're bringing back Boa, and they've got the 329 Jay Johnstone, the upgraded Luzinski. So they're trying to, they've already built a team to compete in the mid to late 70s right now. So we'll see if it works. I mean, I think the competition is a little bit different because the Braves and the Mets are outstanding. And I don't think Philadelphia is one of the top 2 teams in the division, even though they went all the way to the league championship a year ago. Baltimore in the bottom 4 here. I got to go with the Wayne Garland pick. It's my favorite pick here because everybody, Baltimore loses guys to other franchises. Baltimore pitchers are taken away. The Jim Hardens, the Tom Phoebuses, the Don Hoods. They're all the young Doyle Alexander. They're all taken away, and yet they still find guys like Dyer Miller and Wayne Garland. Wayne Garland, they took a 74 card. He'll win 20 games in 1976. Actually, it's funny, but in 1975, they'll make a trade for Mike Torres, who didn't do too much in the 5 years previous. He'll win 20 games in 1975 for Baltimore. Mike Torres in 75, Wayne Garland in 76. Easy peasy for the Orioles. Okay, the Tigers getting down to the last 2 teams here. Of this group, it's interesting. It's kind of interesting who I like the best. I mean, I would say Ron LaFleur, but I think he's too young. I'm going to say Gary Gentry because he was fawned over by a bunch of different teams, all stemming back from his 1969 World Series New York Mets. He was the number 3 guy behind Seaver and Koosman. And Gary Gentry had a really nice 69. Then another year he pitched on 3 days rest. And here in 73, he only has 86 and 2/3 innings, but he does have a 3.43 ERA. And so the Tigers faced the Mets in the World Series a few years ago, and they wanted one of their pitchers. So I think it's a pretty good move for the Tigers. Lastly, the last team, the Pirates. In this group, I think I'm going to go with Rennie Stennett. Being patient with Rennie Stennett because 1971, he hit 353. 1977, he'll hit 339 and be a 1-second baseman. In between, it's up and down for Rennie. But what we like about 75 is that he can finally start to field. He's a 2E20 second baseman, which is great news, as his defense was horrible in 71. And it's 286. Still not a big base stealer. He never would be, I don't think. I think he's a good base stealer by 77. But yeah, I like the Rennie Stennett card. Now they don't have to platoon. They don't need Bill Mazeroski anymore, who retired. Stennett is the full-time everyday second baseman now for the world champions. So having that stability for the Pirates is good. So that leaves us with the token round of the draft, and we'll do a special video for that. I'll give you the rundown of what has to happen in the token round of the draft. Here you see in this light green color, these are players who have been improved. Ralph Garr got into a batting title card, and it is about 30, 31 players who are improved. That means that there are holes on the team rosters. For instance, Atlanta improved Ralph Garr and Phil Niekro. That means they only have 18 players presently on their team. They don't have a 20-man roster like everybody else. Every team that's not represented here. Sometimes you get the Dodgers have 3 improvements: Buckner, Yeager, Ron Cey. They got a 17-man roster. This is what I was saying earlier. They've got an all-star tier of players, and they got scrubs at the bottom. And the middle, the middle area is not as populous. So they got to find 3 bottom feeder guys to fill out their roster with. And that's what the token round of the draft is for, which will be in a separate video. Here is the token list. Going back to the mentions of what the tokens were, you have the draft order. As soon as the regular season ends in October, November, teams start making off-season moves. You start with 5 tokens. If you need to balance out a trade, you add a token, to balance it. Occasionally, you add 2 tokens. If it's, a really critical, trade or a super one-sided, you add a second one. So it's a plus and minus for all the teams. Starting up with 160 for the league, you plus and minus in each of these columns until it adds up, it stays at 160. And you're going to have a number here where the average should be 5, and you're going to have numbers above and below 5 for the tokens. So the way we go about free agency now, as teams start to fill these roster spots and also swap out players that they don't think are pretty good and they want to find somebody better, this is the actual token number here. This is the draft number for the team. And then this is the overall part of the round. I have created 192 records, though practically it won't be that there won't be that many moves. I just created some space. So what happens is Burlington, or the Expos, they acquired 10 tokens by constantly making moves in the off season. They really juggled their roster a lot. 10 tokens. That's the highest number I had. Normally it's 7. So in undrafted free agency, the Expos get the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 6th choice, and 13th, and you get the idea. They get to swap out guys on the roster and look for something better if they wish. And then you have the 10 token, the 9s, the 8s, all the 7s, the 6s. When you have a tie with token number, the next sort is draft position. So there are 3 teams with 7. The Angels drafting 12, Padres drafting 15th, and the Expos again. All the teams drafting 6th. Ohio, team number 1, has a 6th token, so they go there, and then Ohio goes again here. Every time it'll be 1 down to 32, and then 1 down to 32, until eventually the token list gets into the negatives or zeros. The reason I go that far is that teams like the Dodgers have to make a lot of moves, and they might not have enough tokens to make them, so they just have to simply wait until everybody's checked off their roster. Briefly, I can show you what happened last year. This is the token round, adding players here, and then when a team passes they write pass here, and once a team passes, in this instance from a year ago, Philadelphia passed with the 7th pick in the token round, which means that they can't jump back in. They're happy with their roster right there. And so you see a lot of players are added with passes mingled in, and then you start to see the password a lot more frequently. And then usually when you get near the bottom, there's like one team, like here, Oakland, they had to wait till the entire league was complete before they added a player, which in this case was Joe Foy. And then of course you see the 192, they weren't used. So it just goes to show you that Joe Foy was selection 127 with a bunch of passes in there, and then Julian Javier at 81. So I think it's about maybe 60, 70 players. What you have is, again, this group of 30 guys here, plus probably 30 more guys, maybe 20 or 30 more guys, who are just not, the team thinks they can find something better on the street, so they swap it out. So they just flat out cut a guy and sign somebody else. So added to all these. So that'll be a separate video of how the token round of the draft goes. I want to conclude this here with just the 4th through 5th or 8th round. So thanks for checking this out, and we'll see you next time.